Hello and welcome to the Sense Making in a Changing World podcast. I'm Morag. In this episode, I'm speaking with Churchill Fellow, community food forester, multi-award-winning landscape architect and permaculture educator Gavin Hardy, based not far from me in Meanjin, Brisbane. Gav and I go way back to the early days of setting up Northey Street City Farm in Brisbane, where he's now the education coordinator. In 2020, Gav was awarded a Churchill Fellowship to investigate the potential of community food forests and orchards. Because of the pandemic, his journey was delayed, but finally he got to visit 10 of the world's exemplar sites and actually went on to record 51 projects in the United States, Canada, UK, the Netherlands, and Italy. So we sat down together shortly after his report about this was released for this chat. In the conversation, we talked about what he learnt, the insights and the recommendations for establishing successful community food forest and orchard projects here in Australia. But obviously, the ideas are relevant around the world. This Sense Making in a Changing World podcast is an initiative of the Permaculture Education Institute. We teach permaculture design, permaculture teachers, and permaculture business skills online to people on 6 continents, who in turn localise and enrich it and find appropriate ways to apply the planet care ethics of earth care, people care, and fair share wherever they are. We'll also put Gavin's report in the show notes below too, so check that out. I'm recording this episode from my hand-built solar-powered studio here on beautiful Gubbi Gubbi country, surrounded by my permaculture designed gardens in a permaculture eco-village. Before we jump in, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to Sense Making in a Changing World on any of your favourite podcast apps. And please do leave us a 5-star review and a lovely comment. Honestly, it really does help the bots to find this podcast. It was so great to catch up with Gav again. He actually joined us live from Italy during his Churchill Fellowship in an urban agriculture forum I hosted last year. We'll be hosting another session again soon, so keep your eye out for that and you're all invited. Welcome everyone to the Sense Making in a Changing World show. We have a special guest here today who's someone who I've known for, decades. Probably one of the first people I met when I first moved from the southern part of Australia to Brisbane and got involved in the Northey Street City Farm project right at the very beginning as well. This is Gavin Hardy. Welcome, Gav, to the show.
Thanks, Morag. Yeah, thank you very much.
So Gavin has just returned from an epic journey to, I think, 5 countries, the United States, Canada, UK, the Netherlands, and Italy on a Churchill Fellowship. A little bit of a postponed one because of COVID not allowing you to go when you actually were awarded this prize, this fellowship. What Gav went to look at was the potential of community food forests and orchards. And in reading your report, you were saying you went to 51 sites, but you had 10 official sites. So you just immersed yourself over a period of, a couple of months in the world of community food forests. So maybe, Gav, just let us first know, because some listeners are calling in from around the world probably don't know what a Churchill Fellowship is. So maybe let's begin there, and then we can kind of go into the community food forest topic.
Yeah, that's a good place to start, Morag. So the Churchill Fellowships, they've been around since the 1960s. They're available in Australia, the UK, and I understand also Canada. So people might have heard of Winston Churchill, famous person who earned a lot of respect in Australia, particularly from returned soldiers from World War II. When he passed away, a memorial was set up for Winston Churchill in the form of this educational or scholarship trust. And the story goes that it's the biggest fundraising effort ever in Australia, where I believe £2 million were raised on one Sunday back in the 1960s. It wasn't done using a smartphone or a credit card. People were actually going door to door and getting cash. And it's the only time that the banks have ever had to open on a Sunday to receive all that money. And it was a big fundraising success because Churchill had a lot of respect in the community, in the Australian community, and so from there the Churchill Fellowship has been spawned, and Churchill Fellowships are available to anyone from any walk of life. If you're passionate about something that you feel you can only go overseas to learn this stuff, then that you're the person to do it, then you're in with a chance. And so I've been thinking about doing a Churchill Fellowship for 10 years. I've been nagging my partner Amanda about it and throwing her crazy ideas about what I was going to do for my Churchill Fellowship, and then finally landed a really cracker of an idea in 2020, and was successful in the application. So very, very happy about that.
Yeah, so the fellowship funds you to travel around to a journey and an investigation of your choice and your topic, meaning the people that you know in the world that have the kind of information that you want to see and bring back to Australia to share with the community. That's kind of how I understand it. And they're open every year to apply for, aren't they? And you don't have to have a degree in it, just a passion and an experience and an opportunity to share it, to want to share it back out to the community.
Exactly. You don't need to be an academic to get a Churchill Fellowship. In fact, a few years ago, I met a bloke who was an acrobat, and he was going overseas to learn new tricks and new techniques. So yeah, you can come from anywhere to do a Churchill Fellowship, and some of the things that have come out of Churchill Fellowships, like the neighbourhood watch scheme, came out of a Churchill Fellowship. So some of this stuff has real big influence in Australia.
And I think too, what we were talking about just before we turned on the recording as well, that the value of the Churchill Fellowship sending you out, to do this research on really important things, and then to bring it back and document that. So you've documented this. You've got your reports now available on the website. So I'm going to make sure that that's in the link below. So check that out. If you're listening, you'll be able to download the full report of all the things that Gav's going to share with us. So maybe Gav, let's go into that. Like, firstly, why are you so passionate about this topic of community food forests? What about community food forests and community orchards really ignites your passion?
Yeah, okay. So look, I've been involved in community gardening, as you alluded to, Morag. We were involved way back in the 90s with Northey Street and getting that up and running in Brisbane. And since then, I've been involved in community food projects for a long time and in multiple places. And I guess I've always been inspired and excited by growing food in public places. Social connection. I've always met great people, and it's sort of for me, it's about reclaiming the commons, I guess, and turning places that might be underutilised into really, really thriving public spaces. They're unique places. They're different from a park. They're places where people can come together, learn how to grow food, and enjoy each other's company, and also sort of restore the environment. Great for biodiversity and animals and urban nature. Community gardens in general. So when you think about community gardens, you might think about the old style allotment gardens where people might rent a plot to grow vegetables, maybe some fruit. But also shared gardening spaces. They're probably the spaces I'm more excited about, where people collectively garden together. And then from there, my thinking has sort of evolved into food forests and orchards. And we've got a few examples of them in Australia, but we don't have a lot. So I wanted to travel overseas and just understand how they work and sort of compare them to the way we do community gardening now. I get really fired up about food forests because they seem to me to be very resilient, sustainable systems. Been around for a long time. Martin Crawford talks about food forests in the subtropics and the tropics being around for 15,000 years. They're a very old system of gardening. but they provide copious amounts of food. So I'm really interested in that. And then orcharding as well. So orchards are probably a bit more of a basic form of food forestry. But the orchards are probably things that people understand a bit more readily than food forests.
So maybe,
not sure how many.
Just there, like, what's your distinction between a community orchard and a community food forest? Maybe just a bit of a definition point.
Yeah, good question. So food forests typically, well, food forests mimic the patterns that you might find in a natural forest. So if people think about the forest that they visited, perhaps at a national park or local bushland, forest has layers. So you think about the tallest trees, the canopy layer. There might be a lower tree below that, and then shrubbery, and then the herbaceous layer, maybe various levels in that herbaceous layer at the ground level, sort of up to your chest height. Then ground covers and vines. So we see that pattern repeatedly through nature, and food forests mimic that pattern, mainly with edible plants for humans and support species. And the reason why that's happened is because forests are one of the most abundant ecosystems on the planet. Perhaps the coral reefs and the underground seaweed forests are more productive in terms of biomass, but forests are certainly up there in terms of their biomass. So if we can mimic those structures and relationships in food forests, then we get a huge amount of food out of them. So that's a food forest. They're quite complex in some ways, and to understand them. An orchard is a much simpler thing. An orchard is typically, orderly rows of fruit and or nut trees on pasture, traditionally on pasture, grazed by sheep or maybe cattle, or ranging poultry through them. These days, in an urban setting, the animals have generally been replaced by the lawnmower, so they're a much simpler system. And I think most people understand what an orchard is. They're part of the cultural landscape. Yeah.
So I see lots of food forests in people's backyards, and in sort of rural homesteads, sections of food forests, and I see a number of food forests in parts of community gardens, just because of my experience of being involved in Northeast Street City Farm and other similar projects like that. I wonder what you've noticed as being the different challenges that you've come across to establish community food forests as opposed to community orchards. Because like doing it in your own backyard, it's okay, you get to choose and you can decide how you want to design it. But what challenges have you found that for the establishment of common-based, food forests?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a few different challenges, and some of these challenges are common to all community food types. So whether it's an allotment, a shared garden, an orchard, or a food forest, and some of them are specific to a food forest. So maybe I can go through some of them. So fundraising, bringing a group of people together to do work in public space requires funds. How do people do that? So that's one particular challenge. And in my overseas work, I found out a whole range of different strategies that people are using to fund themselves. And some of these operations are big. They're $500,000 charities that are rolling out lots of food forests all over the world, all over their regions. So funding is definitely a challenge for folks. Motivating volunteers. So really, really common issue across community food projects all across the country. If there's anyone watching or listening been involved in a community garden, you'll know that the volunteer effort is keeping up the motivation is another really big challenge. And my work overseas demonstrated that there's a whole lot of different strategies. Perhaps we'll talk about the strategies in a bit more, but keeping people involved and interested. How do you do that? So that's another key challenge. Keeping groups united. So, how do we work together? Us humans, we often work together well, but sometimes we don't. Have you noticed? So groups have evolved different strategies around resolving conflict, or in a more positive sense, working with that diversity of opinion. What are the tools in the toolkit for bringing in people's varying different ideas, and it might all be great. How do we sift them and filter them and bring them together and perhaps create even better ideas from all those other individual ideas? So there's groups overseas, particularly I'm thinking of Beacon Food Forest in Seattle. Some great processes around how they do that. So they're probably my top three challenges in that community food space, food forest space, and I guess maybe particularly focusing on food forests. We might think about education. As we were just talking to, food forests are quite complex, aren't they? And how do you convey that complexity in a public setting? People are coming into a space and going, "Oh, what's this? What's this all about?" It might look like a collection of trees that most folks wouldn't even recognise as a food forest. So how do you get the message across? And we can talk perhaps about signage. So
right.
great examples of how to communicate the message.
Yeah.
With signage.
So that's a lot of really great points to drop in there, and I wonder whether another one would be about communicating with the land owners, land managers, land stewards. Like, what's that relationship like? How do you communicate with the local council or whoever it might be to get that idea? Has that been something that came up as being a really big thing? And I know you've been on both sides of that conversation, having worked within council as well. What challenges and how to maybe overcome some of those challenges too in communicating this idea of a different way of a public landscape?
Yeah. So, and we talk about councils, but more generally, we talk about the landowner. So, in our country, in Australia, that's generally the local council, because people want to do work in a public open space, parkland, green space setting. But it can also be the local church. It can be the scout den. It can be the local library. There's lots of different places where this stuff's been integrated. The local cemetery. So I came across a big orchard in a cemetery in Philadelphia. And so it's those conversations with the different landowners that's important. And it's taking people on this journey and talking about the benefits, talking up the benefits of community food forestry, particularly in an urban setting. But not necessarily. So there are examples of food forestry in rural and regional settings as well. But it's talking about the tremendous benefits. And in my work overseas, I sort of categorised 4 different benefits. One of them being to biodiversity, so the fauna and flora in a place. So some of these projects are immense in what they're doing in biodiversity. So Beacon Food Forest, for example, has 1,000 different species of plants.
Wow.
That's species, not 1,000 plants, 1,000 species of
How
plants.
big is Beacon? What's the scale?
And it's relatively small. So it's at the moment it's let me see if I get this right. It's just over 3 acres in size.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's just wedged with this incredible biodiversity. The Agroforestry Research Trust, Martin Crawford's site in the UK, at his Dartington site, has about 300 species of plants. And in the Picasso food forest in Italy, another 300 species. Now, why is the diversity of plants important? Because it helps to support a diversity of animals, of the fauna. And so at Picasso Food Forest, they've recorded about 300 species of fauna.
Wow.
On their tiny little site. Their site is half a hectare.
Mm.
And they've recorded 50 species of birds.
Amazing.
On their site. So, and we're not talking about fungi or mycelium either. And then
it's just the visible things that you can see and measure easily.
Yeah, and so the fungal networks as well, the different fungi they're recording in these places as well is quite immense. And some of these places started off, Beacon, Picasso started off as just grass fields at the Mode, very low in diversity.
So the biodiversity, I think too, as well as having that, increasing the biodiversity, visibly showing the beauty and the benefit of having more biodiverse spaces. Like what you notice when you pass by a place like that, the feeling of coolness maybe on a hot day, or the sound of the birds and the insects, or the smell of a flowering citrus or something, there's so much other intangible qualities that sometimes they're really hard to measure, aren't they? But it's that quality of life that comes when you are in proximity to those spaces.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's a beautiful segue into one of the other benefits, which is health and well-being. And so in my work, I was going into places and recording my thoughts and feelings in these places. When people have a look at the report, you'll see some little breakout boxes about how I was feeling in some of these places. And, generally the feeling is the feelings are one of total security and just really lovely places to be in. Like the amenity value of these places is immense. Parking up under a shady apple tree or a walnut tree, as I did in Canada and in the USA, and just feeling like I could be there all day. No reason to go, just totally relaxing, unthreatening, not a threatening environment at all. Very welcoming spaces. So I recorded that, and I think it's important for us as a movement to be talking about those sorts of health and well, that amenity benefit. The other amenity benefit I was getting was just the social connection. So I attended some harvesting events put on by some of these amazing organisations that advertise different events that might be happening in the orchard. It might be a pruning event, or it might be a mulching thing that's going on. But I was there during the harvest season, and so I was attending apple picking sessions in Seattle, in Victoria, in British Columbia, on Vancouver Island, and in London. And just those events are fantastic, just for connecting with people. So, just having a laugh, sharing stories, sharing the yields, having a bite on the fruit, and picking big quantities of on these sessions apples, and then those apples, feeling really great because those apples have been taken to charity, given to people in need, or actually processed into bespoke ciders or ales, and then going from there. So
what were some of the other people saying that you met up with? Like, why do they go to those? Why do they come along and volunteer? And what do they get out of it? You must have asked a lot of people, I imagine.
Yeah. So, folks are coming along for different reasons. Some people are learning about, might be doing a permaculture course actually, and learning about how these places operate, and getting some information about how they could design an orchard or a food forest. Other people are just attending because they love it. They've done a few in the past, and that's their social connection. When I was in London, I actually met at the harvest event. There was this lovely woman who flew in from Israel and attend this event. and a couple of other sort of community food related events for a week that she had in London. The jet set coming in to attend this event because she just felt didn't have that opportunity in Israel. And obviously she had a bit of money behind her to do it, but she wanted to come and get the benefit of that social connection. So, yeah, other people are coming in. The commonality is social connection.
Yeah.
Other people are coming in to get a bit of the yield, take a bit of that home, process the food. Either as a table fruit or turn it into apple sauce or turn it into something, and then make a lot of that, and then give that to their friends and neighbours. So there's all this other stuff going on in the informal economy as well. So
So there are two benefits there: health and well-being, and the first one that you mentioned about biodiversity. What are the other two key benefits that you pegged?
Yeah. Okay. So I might just have to pull up my report here. There's so much in this report that even I forget what's in it. Let me just go through a little bit. So one of the other benefits, that's right. It's so obvious, isn't it? Food sustainability. So, and I guess this is in three categories. So, food justice and food sovereignty. Not sure if your listeners and viewers know what those concepts are about.
Well, it's worth describing. I'm sure some people would, but it'd be worth just distinguishing the difference between those two things that you just said too, as well. Yeah. Yeah.
So food justice and food sovereignty. I talk about these in definitions, part of the report, but in a nutshell, food justice is about allowing anyone to have access to food. Now, in our country, we might not see that as a problem, but in some parts of the world, that is a massive problem. In rural and regional and remote parts of Australia, that can be a thing too. So, allowing people to have universal access to, and particularly fresh food. Okay, food sovereignty is about allowing different cultural groups to be able to make decisions about the way that they grow, harvest, cultivate, and process food in their own way. So that they're two very important concepts in the whole food sustainability movement. It's not just about yields; it's about the cultural interaction between food and culture. So,
sorry, go ahead. I was going to ask you, how much did you see that those key parts being part of what the reason that people were doing this work?
Yeah. So in my report, I talk about there being, there are hundreds and possibly thousands of community groups that are in the Northern Hemisphere who are motivated by those concepts. And so what they're doing, they're installing the food forests and the orchards on property that they manage. They may even own it. They probably lease it. They're restoring old orchards on abandoned public land. And then there's groups that are going out who are harvesting the urban orchard, like I gave that example with the event that I attended. So there's a group in Seattle, for example, called City Fruit, and they harvest the urban orchard. So Seattle reputedly has 7,000 fruit trees in public places, which is quite remarkable when you think about that. They're going around and harvesting those fruit trees and then distributing that food to charity so that people get access to fresh table fruit. And then the fruit that's a bit spoiled, it's a bit buggy or a little bit bruised, they're processing that into ciders and beverages. So, and that's fruit that would normally just go to waste. It would just rot on the ground.
So I think this is a really interesting thing, because a lot of the comments that I've heard about why say, a local authority might not want to have urban fruit trees is because of the problem of the fallen fruit and their public health issues that entails. Whereas when you combine having an organisation and support an organisation to be able to engage in this work. So I wonder how is that group supported itself? Because if they're harvesting it to then give it back to charity and harvesting from public fruit, what's the relationship between the public fruit and this group?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a big question. So I guess there's a couple of things there. Local authorities are generally trying to get rid of the fruit trees because they're dumping all this rotting fruit on the ground. So these organisations are set up to ameliorate that problem for the local authority. It really helps out the local authority because they're eliminating that issue. The groups are funded in really interesting and diverse ways to be able to offer that service. So they're going around and harvesting the fruit trees for no charge, and I got really like, wow, how do they do that? They're employing 5 or 6 or more people, and so how are they offering a livelihood but offering a service for next to no charge or free? And the way they're doing that is partnering. So there's this partnership model that I talk about in the report. So an organisation like City Fruit, they'll partner with charitable food banks and other organisations, meal programs, that sort of thing, that organisations that are helping out people in need. The funders, they'll see that City Fruit, they're helping out the charitable food sector, and they'll want to fund that. They'll want to fund City Fruit because they're an enabler for the food bank, okay, and they're offering fresh food. A lot of food banks are offering a lot of processed food, but they're offering fresh food. So the funders will come in and fund that, and the donors and the sponsors and everyone else. The other thing that these groups do really well is their fundraising fiends. They're demons when it comes to the fundraising stuff, and so they've got social media people, they've got fundraising experts, the board of directors or the management committee. They're all out there every day promoting what they do. They're amazing networkers. City Fruit in Seattle, they've got hundreds of donors, hundreds of different funding sources coming in: philanthropic foundations, government grants, donors and sponsors, individual donors, and then they're running small businesses as well on the side, which also promotes the organisation but provides an income. They'll be running tree care services. They might run a gourmet food tour. They'll be making the ciders and the ales, and they'll be selling that and in partnership with a beverage provider and getting 10% of the profits, and on it goes.
Gav, what I'm hearing you talk about is really a local food ecology, like is this ecology of organisations that exist together, and there's no kind of coordinating body, but they're all kind of interconnected, and there's obviously a conversation that happens in amongst them. And I wonder whether there is obviously there's a culture of local food in that city, but I wonder whether are there events, for example, or organisations like advocacy organisations that bring together those different sectors? Because I would imagine, say in Brisbane, if we had like space where all those different groups could come in and be in conversation together, more of that partnership and that collaboration would happen, not to control each other, but just more of those connections can be made. So is it about creating more context for connection to happen to support these? Do you think that's like a key part of this?
Exactly. And, there's some amazing organisations overseas, and we've got some good ones here too. So when you were talking then, I thought about Sustain in Melbourne. They're running an Urban Agriculture Month in November, and you were involved last last November, and so was I. And so, Sustain is about sort of bringing different groups together and talking about urban agriculture, and of course, community food is part of that story, and bringing different organisations together to, have one voice, and be in alliance, I guess. And the charitable food banks are in that conversation as well. Different organisations, universities, of course, they're a really important player in this. And some of the organisations overseas that I met with, they're partnering with universities. The postgrads and undergrads are coming in and doing research on site, producing lots of data, publications, and that's attracting funding as well from government organisations because they can see some rigour and defendability there.
Awesome. Great.
Yeah, so amazing stuff. And then, so I talked about Sustain just then in Australia, overseas. One of the big things that's sort of in the Pacific Northwest, so that area of Seattle and British Columbia and down into Oregon, the food policy councils are a big thing. So they're groups that come together to talk about food policy at a higher level. They're bringing in lots of different groups and networking and really getting the conversation going with the power brokers. Really in government and in corporations, and the corporates are coming on board and they're involved in the conversation as well. And so, yeah, you're right, Morag. We need to bring in our different groups and talk about what are our commonalities. And I guess my role at Community Gardens Australia, I'm sort of at the operational level, but I know at the board level, they're really deeply committed to that conversation with like-minded groups.
Did you recently have a meeting in Canberra? Were you at that meeting? Was that a policy meeting? What happened at that one?
Yeah. So I was involved in the what was that called? The Canberra Urban Agriculture Forum. That was a great meeting. There were probably 50 people in the room. One of the senators was there from Canberra, Senator David Pocock was there. He spoke for a little bit, very supportive of what we do in urban agriculture in general, and community food. And then there were 4 Churchill Fellows talking as well. So Dr. Nick Rose, Naomi Lacey, who's the president of Community Gardens Australia, and Fiona Buning, who's Canberra president, who's really interested in urban incubator programs for young farmers. And of course, you know all of these people, Morag. So that was a great forum. There was lots of discussion about, what's the future for Canberra in terms of local food. Canberra only gets 5% of its food locally.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yes, it's very dependent on imported food, and I'm not sure what the definition of local is, whether it's within the ACT boundary or not. But yeah, so there's so much potential in Canberra for a local food movement. They've got lots of open space. They've got a great cohort of people who know how to grow food. There's already a small little orcharding industry. It's been around for decades in Canberra.
And an amazing food co-op movement as well. That's a brilliant food co-op right in the heart of the city there too. Yeah. So we've done 3 benefits. Let's get to the 4th one. What did you see as the core 4th benefit of food forests?
So just going back a little bit to food. So I talked about food sustainability, but I didn't talk about yields. And so some of these organisations are getting amazing yields. So in 2021, the Life Cycles project in Canada, they harvested 79 tonnes of apples from the urban orchard, that's a city of 350,000 people. That's the size of Victoria, from public and private apple trees. So getting significant amounts of food. And typically, in a typical year, 2021 was a big year. It was an amazing year, all through North America for yields. But typically, I get 15 to 20 tonnes every year of fruit. Great, really good stuff. And then, I was some of those harvest events, the London harvest event. In one morning we got half a tonne of apples.
Amazing.
From 5 trees.
So, how much of the community food forest actually measuring, like yield? Because when you go out to, say, industrial agriculture, like you weigh and measure how much wheat you get in, whatever. When you come into a food forest, you can measure the apples because the apples are a thing. But to look at that whole system of all the food, like 300 species, and mostly you're not harvesting it all because it is part of the system itself. It's a completely different model. How do you then use, like, what are the kind of indicators and monitoring systems that are being used to talk about yield in a way that can kind of compare? Because it's not apples with apples, it's a completely different beast.
Yeah, it's a particular challenge. The orchards, the community orchard organisations, they are measuring with portable scales, and that's a relatively easy thing to do. But because of this tremendous diversity you get in some of these food forests, unless you're walking around with your portable scales to every single plant that you're harvesting from, it's a very tricky thing to do. And I think we're not there yet in getting the metrics. Beacon Food Forest did talk about recently harvesting 1,700 kilos. So they've got a little bit of metric there, but they're a 24/7 open site as well. So, and they encourage people to come in and harvest. So
and who knows, and also I know too, from City Farm and other community gardens in universities like that, you encourage people just to harvest a leaf here and there. So you have no idea how many leaves have come off that. It's not like you're going to rip out the whole lettuce and weigh that and go, okay, we've got 100 kilos of lettuces today. It's this constant flow. And also, when you measure just yield as well, you miss out on all these other benefits that you're talking about. And it's really about taking that metrics to a different logical typing, stepping out from just quantification of kilos of food.
Exactly. What some of these organisations do really well is in their annual reports, they might talk about yield, but they'll be able to put into metrics those non-tangible benefits. So, how many people got involved in events over the whole year? How many volunteers did they have? So they get those sorts of metrics too. And
I'd love to hear it, like how many people come to a community garden and take a cutting and get it happening in their own backyard as well. There's like so many perennial plants can just have cuttings taken out and be spawning gardens everywhere around the city. Like, wouldn't it be great to but that only comes through storytelling, doesn't it? And being in interviews. And it's a different way of measuring the that's still about the quantity of food, but it's not in that, like, it's like you can't measure the quality of well-being in Australia by measuring our GDP. Like, it just doesn't work. The kind of metrics is all wrong. So,
that particular metric is all wrong.
Yeah,
GDP, and I think a lot of people understand that. We've got a big problem with that. So metrics is only part of the story. It's the conversations, the stories we're getting from people involved, the user experience. They're really important too, and both of them collectively add up to talking to government, talking to decision makers about the benefits. And that's what some of these leading organisations overseas, and some in Australia too, do really well. They communicate those messages in a very effective way. So anyway, we digress. We were talking about food. I'm going to go into The fourth benefit, capacity building. So this is all about community capacity building, increasing our ability to know about food, to grow food, and to generally become more autonomous and skillful people. And so some great examples, Morag. So when I was in Miami, I was with this tremendous program called Food Forests for Schools program. So this is an organisation that's to date installed 28 food forests in elementary schools in Miami.
Wow.
They're aiming to get that up to 51 in the Miami-Dade County. And so the food forests are very integrated into the school. They wrap around the buildings. They're part of everyday life. The kids see them all the time. And the kids are learning in the garden. So they're learning their science and their maths and their biology with approved curriculum in the gardens, and their scores are going right up. But the other thing that we're learning about is nutrition and how to grow food. And they're getting lessons from really inspiring teachers, and they're also taking food home to mum and dad. Copious amounts of food.
Oh, what a brilliant project!
Yeah, what an amazing program. And one of the really delightful stories I heard was a lot of these kids come from poorer neighbourhoods. They come from immigrant families from the Caribbean or Cuba or Central America. And they're living with the extended family. So mum and dad, grandma and granddad. Grandma and granddad, they'll know about the foods being grown in the food forest because that's what they used to grow back home. But mum and dad might not. So the story, really lovely story I heard was that in some of these households, papa or mama is teaching the kids about how to use the foods.
Nice.
Really tremendous. So, this sort of cross-generational stuff that's going on through food. Really good. So, that's an example of capacity building where the kids are really learning about being a bit more independent, how they can grow food at home. They might only have a small patch to be able to do that, but they can grow a little bit. And they can grow stuff in their food forests at school, and they have after-school gardening clubs and that sort of thing. Amazing stuff going on there. Again, the funding model is all about philanthropy and corporate money and USDA and Environmental Protection Agency money coming in and partnerships with universities and on it goes. It's sort of,
so the school themselves don't pay for these. The school gets the programs for free, and the children and the community get involved for free, and the organisation that's running this brings in that funding to enable their team to go out and do this. So do they have teams that stay with those schools, or do they train up people in the schools to be able to run those? Like, how does that work? Do they keep ranging around them? Like, tell us more.
So it's a fascinating place, isn't it? Food Forests for Schools, they have a team of 6, and they are dedicated to supporting teachers and school admin to continue maintaining the food forests once they've been established. And so they'll be in there every year, certain critical times of the year, doing the maintenance on the gardens, because the school teachers don't have the time. The school teachers just need to come in, do the teaching, maybe teach enough, do an after-school gardening club. But the team at Food Forests for Schools, they'll be in there supporting teachers, that's for sure, and they're funded to do that. And that's the power. That's really the power of this funding model, is you're offering a service that the school principal, they don't have to pay for it. That money's coming in from the general society who think it's a great idea, and they'll support it.
So this service delivery model was something that you said you wanted to talk about. So this is obviously one of those kind of models that works to make sure that people who need this or have the, or places that can really be catalysts for change can access this. So they have these food forests, which are demonstrations, they're education, it's food security, it's intergenerational relationship building. It's all of those things together, and that's valued. So what are maybe some of those other delivery models that you've seen that are behind making these work? Because that's kind of what we need to know. How do we roll out these projects everywhere? That's what we need to know.
Yeah. So I developed through this overseas work. I developed two different models, and Food Forest for Schools was one of the examples of the multiple site service provider. So these are organisations that are providing a service to multiple sites, to multiple places. So Food Forest for Schools, multiple schools. For the Orchard Project in the UK, they've delivered 540 orchards across the nation in 7 different cities, working generally with underprivileged, deprived neighbourhoods for a no-cost service. Who else is there? There's I'm just trying to think through my places. So another group in the Netherlands called Coöperatie Ondergrond, 16 food forests in the city of Rotterdam, partnering with different groups, installing food forests in a fairly dense urban environment. So they're multiple site service providers. Their funding models are generally the same. The Rotterdam model is a little bit different. But it's generally the genius is providing a service for no or low cost and getting your funding to come in from other sources, and building a story that the general society believes in. Oh, I want to be involved in that. I'll fund that. That's a great idea, and it's defendable. There's no bullshit about it. This is real stuff. We can deliver on the ground. We've got the experience. We've got the runs on the board. Some of these groups, they took ages to get to that point. We know what it's like. Don't be Morag, been activists for a long time, and they've got to a point now where they've got a great story to tell, and that's sort of how it works. So that's one of the models. The other model is the urban orchard service provider. So I talked about City Fruit in Seattle, and I also touched on the Life Cycles project on Vancouver Island. So they're harvesting the total stock of fruiting trees, shrubs, and vines in a region, and they've got a great story, and funders want to come in and fund that because they're helping out people in need who are generally living in food deserts, where either there's no access to a fresh grocer, or the food costs too much to buy fresh food, and so that's a great story, and the funders will come in and fund that. So they're the two models. With that urban orchard service provider model, I think it can only really work in regions where you're getting tons of yield. It doesn't have to be apples, and in the Pacific Northwest it can be apples. It's generally apples, pears, cherries, stone fruit, maybe blueberries, grapes is another thing, kiwi fruit, and once again you'll go into their annual reports and you'll see all the metrics on all the different fruits that they're harvesting. Very good at recording that. But in our country, in Queensland, it could be mangoes. It could be
macadamias, bunya nuts.
I think about regional Queensland. I think about the town of Bowen, for example. Remnant mango trees in that area. The big mango tree yields a lot of fruit in a season. I think further south, I think olives. I think all of the weedy olives through the Adelaide Hills. Oh my God, there's so many olives we could be harvesting. Yeah.
I know through where I grew up in Ringwood, I would go ranging around and find there's all these plum trees of just all throughout, those really dark purpley coloured. They were street trees everywhere. They were just planted because they had beautiful colour, but no one ate the fruit. I would go on harvesting them. This, wherever you are, you can find something.
Yes, yeah. So there's fruit trees around in every region, of course. But I think for this service to be viable, you need to be getting tons of fruit. And so, there's potential in Australia, but we need to do some more research on what's viable.
Even, like maybe it doesn't exist yet, but maybe that's part of the model of actually saying, this is a model that can work. Therefore, we need to encourage more fruit tree planting in public places. Like that could be part of the support, because up until now it's not been supported because there's not been the infrastructure. So you can say, okay, we now have a model that can work in tandem with that. We can get rid of the food deserts in the city, and we, particularly with the cost of fresh food now, like this could be put together as a combined package to present. And so it'll take a while to get off the ground in that way.
So we could set up the multiple site service provider. Now I've had conversations with people in Canberra around this, about setting up something similar to the Philadelphia Orchard Project, who've delivered 67 community orchards throughout the city of Philadelphia since 2008.
Wow.
And we see Canberra as something that could be done similarly. We could set up that sort of service delivery model, getting community orchards all through the city, and as those trees grow up, then we could set up an urban orchard harvesting model as well, and then set up some little side businesses, a fruit tree care business, for example.
Yeah, of course.
One of the things I notice with arborists in our city, they do a great job. They look after our trees, but that specialist knowledge in arborists looking after fruit trees to increase their production, arborists generally don't have that. That's a real niche that we could be filling through that model.
There are just a few courses, aren't there, in terms of urban orcharding? And, I know through, say, the Burnley College of Horticulture have started running some really innovative courses in managing urban food systems. And so it does require this multiple phases of change simultaneously in a way. But I come back to that thing, like those bigger conversations need to be had. So the work that Sustain's doing is so important, and we need to support and amplify that and have conversations in each of the regions far more often. They're Melbourne based. We need those conversations happening everywhere.
Absolutely. And I think that's going to happen. The next Urban Agriculture Month, I believe there's going to be a big forum in Sydney starting up. I'm trying to get the mob up here into Brisbane. We need to have some big conversations in Brisbane and Queensland. So much potential in our great state. And the other thing about education, so it's a certificate in community orcharding that's coming out of the UK. I'm talking to the CEO of the Orchard Project, Kath Rosen, about bringing that program to Australia. And then there's the Master Fruit Tree Steward program, comes out of Seattle. And I'd love to bring that program into Australia as well. So there's programs and education out there for that sort of capacity building as well. And that's another revenue stream for that urban orcharding model.
And how to support teachers as well, like that model from down in Miami, that would be an amazing
so there's a lot of learnings about how to develop curricula with the teachers, how these two dynamic duo of Eddie Racinos and Debbie LaBelle in Miami, who just spent mega amounts of time working with teachers, developing curricula, making sure it worked for them to make it seamless. You've got to make it seamless for those people.
That's right.
And that's what they cracked it.
Oh,
wow. A lot of hard work, but they cracked it.
And that myceliating is what we need, fantastic.
Yeah, exactly.
So education on so many fronts, from the education for the policymakers, education for those who are, going to be doing the nuts and bolts of it, those who are rolling out the education program for the children. There's so many opportunities. I mean, this is what I see all the time. When you apply a permaculture lens or apply a community orchard lens or whatever it might be to what we've got now, there are so many niches that need filling, and we need to be in conversation together to bring out, this change and to make it visible. And I guess the other thing that you mentioned too was, volunteers and people. Like, what were your inspirations around? What made people really want to come and be engaged and keep them engaged and keep them in conversation with each other in a way that was generative, as opposed to, degenerative, not degenerative, but, like dissipative is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah. So some of these groups, they do amazing work. So Beacon Food Forests, before COVID, they were at a typical working bee, they'd get 100 people to a working bee. How do they do that? Post-COVID, they're getting 20 to 30. Those numbers will build up again. So my observation is they do that in a few ways. One of the things is, and it's very simple, they make sure they have fun.
Yeah.
So, we're all busy, aren't we? We're busy people. We make choices about our social life. I'm going to go to the stuff that's fun, and so they make sure they have a bit of fun. They'll do a bit of work. At the end of the work session, they'll sit up on the benches with an amazing view of the city, and they'll sit back and drink a few home brews and share some food, and it's just a really pleasant and convivial atmosphere. So that's my number one word is fun with volunteers. Two is making sure you've got your timing right for the volunteers. So making sure you've got your session that works in with the neighbourhood, the timing. So they run a session called the Sunset Lab. So Sunset Lab is you come down just after work on a Tuesday afternoon, I think it is. You're not going to get 100 people, but you might get 20. Do some work. Again, amazing sunset, kick back, have a few brews.
Nice.
Off you go. Next thing. That's another thing they do really well. The other thing that Beacon Food Forest does really well is this inclusive model of sociocracy or dynamic governance, where everyone gets to say in how the place works. Every idea is valued. There's a process for deciding whether your idea is going to get up or not. It might not, but at least people have listened to you. And so volunteers feel like they own the place.
Yeah.
They've got this sense of ownership in the place. They're an integral part, and they're really important. And some of the other groups put volunteers front and centre. If you don't have volunteers, are the most important part of the whole operation, really. And so putting programs in place to support them. So there'll be the Lead Orchard Volunteer Program in Philadelphia. Those people are getting supported. They're allowed to act autonomously in orchards all around the city, but there's this group who've got their back.
And I guess with that too, there'd be some sort of supportive, education. So they're learning great skills in that. Maybe they get to take home some cuttings or food or other things that they can take back to their own. So there's that to me is such an important part, because often people can sort of feel like, oh, it's just like coming in here and I'm doing all the hard yakka, but someone else is making, as long as there's that engagement. And I think putting the volunteers front and center is so critical.
So mission critical. And the Lead Orchard volunteers or the neighbourhood ambassadors in Seattle, they'll get all the training and they'll get all the equipment as well.
Yeah, right.
The funds come in and they've got the equipment, and so they're doing the work. It's seamless.
With autonomy also comes a level of respect. And with that level of respect, it's that purpose, and connection. And it's It's really very simple, isn't it?
It's simple. Those people are celebrated in the neighbourhoods where they work as well. There'll be the blog posts going out and the social media and all that. That's all happening as well. And so that's another, just lots of different ways of motivating your volunteers. The other thing I noticed was having really cool buildings, like bespoke design structures and spaces that people can come into, and they want to be there because they're just really cool to hang out in. And I saw that a bit. And so that's another thing that attracts people to a place, is we don't generally see customised buildings in our urban spaces, unless they're really high end, very expensive, big end of town stuff. It's those local little bespoke, everyday, in the neighbourhood structures and buildings are the ones that are really interesting. Caught my eye, and certainly other people, they've been attracted to those spaces.
One thing that I noticed too in some of the community gardens in, say, Berkeley, was just the beauty of the art that entered into the space. So the quality of the mosaics of the centerpiece where people would meet, like you'd sit on these beautifully mosaic seats and a mosaic floor in the middle that had just incredible feeling being there. And then when you looked out into the garden space, there was the trellises where they would, be growing up something, and they were designed as it was like this web of life. It wasn't just a trellis with a piece of wire stuck up. It was beautiful. And so I think it's a bit like the buildings, like all the infrastructure, like somehow that thought and the presencing and the bringing in the culture into it, not just a production space. It's a space that you want to be and express your sense of belonging to place. And
exactly. And they're inspirational places that have been crafted.
Crafted. That's the word.
That's really it. That they might have a lot of good design thought behind them, but at the end of the day, when you go to build it, there's a bit of craft that's going on. And I think and often built by the locals as well. So there's a story behind it as well that people can relate to. And I think that's what really attracts people to those places. And then the volunteers will come in and they'll want to be there. And it's the combination of all those different things I talked about that really works for them.
It's a process of attraction, isn't it? Rather than sort of saying we've got to do this, we've got a job to do. It's how to invite people to come and play with you, to be part of something that just is going to be really joyful and feel like you're able to make a contribution while really nourishing your own soul. One thing I'd like to say to listeners and viewers, perhaps a little bit controversially, is I'm not into this term, the working bee. I'm into this term, the work party. Mm-hmm. Let's make it a party. Let's make it fun. And I think there's just a changing of the words, the terminology, the phrases can be really helpful. Yeah, absolutely, because it does. It shifts your relationship with the concept, and you go along there expecting to have a bit of fun, and so you bring your sense of humor, and you bring the food, and you bring some music, and bring your guitar, and
exactly.
So Gav, I wonder whether you could just let people know what's the best way to get involved in this kind of movement, either here for the listeners in Australia, but also, in other parts of it. What's the way that you are seeing, based on this research that you've just done, it's all fresh for you, how do you see that we can turn up the dial on this and really kind of amplify the community food forest movement around the world? Because it feels like it's something that, for all the reasons we've talked about, just can be so important and so nourishing for communities, whether they're urban or rural communities, of places of restoration of biodiversity, restoration of landscapes, and also, addressing climate change and well-being, all simultaneously with this kind of one kind of concept. What can we do?
Yeah, I think in some ways the answer is quite simple. In wherever you live, there'll be a community group involved in something. It'll be a scout, or it'll be Girl Guides, Residents Association, the local library. Have those conversations with those people about, hey, learn about this really amazing idea called the community orchard or the community food forest. And I think that could be a very good thing to have at the scout den, or down at the swimming pool, or in the local cemetery, or at the footy field, or the leftover space at the footy field. Don't want to plant the orchard in the footy field. That might be a problem. But wherever you are, I guess what I'm about is trying to embed this stuff in the everyday fabric that we currently have. And for most of us, we live in a suburban place or an urban place, and we're surrounded by community institutions. We're also surrounded by green space, and just have those conversations with folk to get the conversation rolling. And if you're involved in a community garden already, have those conversations about orchards, food forests. Maybe they don't have one of them yet, or maybe they're thinking about a different way of doing things, moving away from the vegetable patch, going into more tree-based, perennial food-growing systems like the orchard or the food forest. Just start having those conversations, and if you go to my website or look at my report and other people's as well, there's all of the technical information is out there for how to do it. And we have great designers here who know how to design a food forest. Technically, we've got a lot of good information about food forests and how to create them. But I think initially it just starts with the conversations, and then just learning about the fundraising, the motivating volunteers, all those other sort of challenges, how to overcome them. And going from there. That's where I would start. Right where you're at, wherever you're at, that's the place to start.
Yeah, because you already have a set of relationships and a set of belonging, and that is the place to begin always, isn't it? With where you are, with what you have, with the people that you know, and just start to let it roll from there. Yeah.
Yeah. Your local school, obviously. If your kids are going to local primary and they don't have a Stephanie Alexander kitchen garden yet, maybe they want a food forest.
So, Gav, I'm wondering. So, for example, if there's a group of people who go to their school and say, "Yes, we like this idea," can you bring in like a video or examples of this? What would you point to if there was a group that were kind of showing a bit of interest but needed more visual, and there's not one in their local neighborhood that they can just go and visit? Where would you point people to so they could say, okay, let's have a little video day. We'll watch some videos. We'll talk about this, and we'll see what we can imagine for our site. Where would you send people?
Okay, so specifically for a school, they can go to my website and then click on my YouTube channel, and I've got some video of a couple of the schools in Miami, of their gardens, some interviews I've done there. Also read my report specifically. I also have a case study report. People want that, they can email me, and we'll put the email up there. But they can email me and get that case study report and read about the Food Forest for Schools program.
Excellent.
Go to the Food Forests for Schools website as well, and we'll get that up there as well. There's a couple of great videos within that web page. The Food Forests for Schools sits within the Education Fund, much bigger fund in Miami there, but they've got a web page just dedicated to Food Forests for Schools. They're a unique program. I've not come across another food forest-based food growing program in the world. In Australia we have the fabulous Stephanie Alexander Kitchen Garden program, more of a program dedicated to raised garden bed box gardens with vegetable growing, and I think fruit trees as well. But yeah, so that might be a starting point. Having a look at that.
Actually, just taking a look at your report and all the different examples, and then, like you said, your YouTube channel, you've taken, you've got clips from many of the different places that you visited. So that would be a good link. And then, launching from your report to many of the other different examples around. So I think we'll put all of that down below. And then I guess if anyone's sort of looking for a little bit more information into more of the texture of the detail as well, I'm sure you're open to people getting in touch with you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the more conversations, the better. I'm about getting projects on the ground. All this research stuff is great. We need it. We need to do a lot more case study research, but I'm really into project delivery.
Yeah.
I come from a project management, engineering, landscape architecture background, and that's my focus, is getting more and more projects happening on the ground.
Yeah, great. And let's see how we can make that happen. That's so exciting. And I think it's just been wonderful that you've had this journey to bring all of that together and to take the time to think this through and to get those really strategic points where you can go, right, that's where we need to pay attention. And these are the key things. I think often, we spend our time going out to the world and visiting places, but actually coming back and the Churchill Fellowship opportunity to report back on that and be really clear. I think, thanks for taking that time to do that, Gav.
Well, yeah. And, as I was saying before, I've been thinking about a Churchill Fellowship for 10 years. And I've been reflecting for a long time about what are the gaps in our knowledge about delivering community food projects in a more effective way. And so those were the things I was targeting, governance. How do these people how do they make a quid? How do they fundraise their operations? How do they manage volunteers? How do they give volunteers confidence to go up a ladder and harvest apples, 3 meters off the ground? How do they do that? So I was really reflecting a lot on that, and COVID was interesting too, because it delayed being able to go overseas, but that was actually a good incubator for thinking even more about my project. And I think it's, in the end, I've got a much better outcome as a result.
Yeah, great. Yeah. I'm sure too, if people are really interested in having you as a guest speaker to share your results, are you open to that as well, for people who have organisations for you to go
Absolutely.
and have a chat?
Yes, yeah. I'm road showing what I'm doing at the moment. I'm trying to get around as many places as I can, whether it's in person or online. I'm doing some ABC radio stuff.
Brilliant.
I think that I'm doing something for Outback Queensland Radio tomorrow afternoon.
Yep.
And I want to get out to regional radio and just talk about this stuff and get people enthused and excited about it.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so listeners, if you just heard that, that's an open invitation to get in touch with Gav to see how you can activate your community food projects, your community food orchards and food forests here in Australia, at least. And you have the possibility too to zoom out to anywhere in the world as well. So yeah,
absolutely. And talking to people who might be interested in setting up a regional-based service delivery organisation, be really keen to talk to folks like that. I'm talking to some folks in Canberra about setting up an orchard organisation. So really keen to be able to do that, have those conversations as well.
And then I guess part of what you'd be doing too is then keeping those different projects networked so that they, lift each other as well.
Absolutely, and then talking to peers overseas and bringing their expertise into our country and getting them involved in this whole process as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Gav, for taking the time today to chat with us about this incredible work. And I can imagine as I walk through the streets the possibilities that, if you put those community food forest lens on as you walk down your street today, see what happens. It's quite amazing when you do that.
Let's see what it is. Thanks, Morag.
Yeah, thanks, Gab. All right, take care. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Sense Making in a Changing World with my dedicated and talented friend Gavin Hardy. Check out the show notes below for the link to his report and to other resources. And also check the notes too for where you can find out the details of all of our permaculture courses, our YouTube, the blog, free masterclasses and film clubs. And make sure you signed up to hear news and updates, and come and join us at the Permaculture Education Institute to learn practical skills for designing and teaching permaculture and making a good livelihood while living a permaculture-inspired, one planet way of life. Until next time, take care. See you soon.